A wagon wheel groaned and stopped in the middle of the street. A thin woman climbed down with both hands shaking. Two small children clung to the back of her dress. The horses were skin and bone. The wood of the wagon was split along the side. A bucket hung empty from the axle. Dust drifted up and settled on her gray hair. She walked 3 steps and stopped. She looked at the man standing on the porch of the sheriff's office. Her voice was so soft the wind almost took it. "Can we rest here? Just one night. On the edge of your town." The man on the porch did not answer right away. He looked at the children. He looked at the empty bucket. He looked at the 4 men watching from across the street. Then he stepped down off the porch. "Stay with me on this one." The town was called Cedar Bluff. It sat on a flat stretch of grass at the bottom of a long red ridge. There was one main street. There were 6 buildings on each side of that street. There was a livery and a feed store and a small hotel called the Stockman. There was a saloon with green doors and a bank with iron bars on the windows. The bank was the biggest building. The bank was always the biggest building in towns like Cedar Bluff. 4 men ran the town. They ran the cattle. They ran the water. They ran the votes. They were called the Cattlemen's Council, and they met every Tuesday in the back room of the saloon. They drank good whiskey and they signed papers, and they decided who lived where and who did not. They did not like outsiders. They did not like widows. They did not like land they did not own. The sheriff's office sat at the far end of the street. It was a low building with 1 window and a heavy oak door. The man who lived in that building was tall and lean and slow to speak. He had a thick brown mustache and a long scar above his left eye. He wore a black hat with a flat brim. He wore a worn gun belt with a single Colt on his right hip. He walked with a small limp in his left leg from a bullet he took 14 years ago in Texas. His wife had died of fever 3 winters back. He had no children. He had a small house behind the office with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. He kept a Bible on the table and a tintype of his wife on the mantel. He did not drink in the saloon. He did not gamble in the saloon. He did not vote with the council. He was the only man in Cedar Bluff who did not owe them anything. The widow on the wagon had been turned away from the stockman that morning. She had been turned away from the boarding house. She had been turned away from the church. She had been told to keep moving. She had been told there were no rooms. She had been told the children could not stay. She had walked her horses 1 more block and stopped in front of the office with the heavy oak door. She did not know the sheriff's name. She did not know about the council. She only knew that her grandchildren had not eaten in 2 days and that the older one was running a low fever. She had a leather pouch around her neck. Inside the pouch was a folded paper. The paper was the deed to a 4,000-acre parcel of grass and timber on the north side of the ridge. The parcel was called the Coleman Claim. The council had been trying to take that paper for 10 years. 3 lawyers had tried to buy it. 2 men had tried to threaten it out of her. 1 man had tried to burn the cabin down around it. She had buried that man's brother in 1885, and she had buried her own husband 6 months later. Her name was Martha Coleman. She was 61 years old. She weighed 94 pounds. She had not slept in a bed in 9 days. The sheriff stepped off the porch and walked across the dust to the wagon. The 4 men across the street watched him. One of them was the owner of the bank. One of them was the owner of the saloon. One of them was the foreman of the largest ranch in the county. The 4th was a man named Royce Calder, who was the head of the council and the largest landowner in 3 counties. Calder was a short man with a wide chest and a heavy gold watch chain. He had small pale eyes and a neck like a tree stump. He had killed 2 men in 1879, and he had never been charged. He had been watching the widow's wagon since it crossed the bridge at the south end of town. He had sent a boy to the stockman to make sure no room would be offered. He had sent a boy to the boarding house with the same word. He had sent a 3rd boy to the church with a $5 piece for the collection plate. He had also sent a fourth boy across the back lot of the saloon with a rifle wrapped in a wool blanket. That boy was now lying flat on the roof of the feed store. The sheriff did not see the boy on the roof. He did not see the rifle. He saw the widow. He saw the children. He saw the empty bucket. He took off his hat. He said his name was Wyatt Hollis. He said the children looked tired. He said there was a house behind the office with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. He said the bed was made, and there was cornmeal in the cupboard and a side of bacon in the smokehouse out back. He said she could have the keys. He said he would sleep in the office tonight. He said it as plain as a man asks for water. Martha Coleman did not cry. She had stopped crying in 1885. She put one shaking hand on the side of the wagon, and she said thank you. She said it twice. The older grandchild was a boy of 9 named Samuel. The younger was a girl of 6 named Ruth. Samuel had not spoken since the cabin burned. Ruth held a wooden horse her grandfather had carved for her birthday. Wyatt Hollis lifted Ruth down with both hands, and he set her gently on the wooden walk. He lifted Samuel down the same way. He took the reins of the horses, and he led them to the trough behind the office. He filled the trough with the bucket. He carried Martha's leather satchel inside the small house, and he set it on the table next to the Bible. He laid the keys on top of the satchel. He did not look at the paper around her neck. He did not ask any questions about where she came from. He turned and walked back through the door. He closed the door softly behind him. He crossed the dust to the porch of his office. He sat down on the porch step. He laid his rifle across his knees. He looked at the 4 men across the street. He did not move for a long time. The first hour of the evening passed quietly. Lamps came on along the street. A piano started in the saloon. A dog barked behind the livery. A boy ran out of the feed store with a bag of oats and ran back inside. Royce Calder came out of the saloon and crossed the street to the office. He climbed the 3 steps. He stopped in front of Wyatt. He looked down at him for a long moment. He said the town did not need that woman in it. He said the town would be better by morning if the wagon was on the road again. He said it would be a kindness to put her back on the trail tonight. Wyatt Hollis looked up at him. He said the woman and the children were sleeping. He said they would sleep through the night. He said no one would wake them. He said it in the same plain voice he had used with Martha. Calder did not like the answer. Calder leaned in close. Calder said there were ways for a sheriff to find himself out of a job. He said there were ways for a sheriff to find himself out of a town. He said there were ways for a sheriff to find himself in a pine box. Wyatt Hollis did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He said good night to Royce Calder. He said it the way a man tells a stranger to move along. Calder stared down at him for another long moment. Then he turned and walked back down the steps and across the dust and into the saloon. The green doors closed behind him. The piano started up again. The dog barked behind the livery. Wyatt Hollis sat on the porch step and watched the windows of his small house. The lamp in the back room came on. Then the lamp in the front room came on. Then the lamp in the back room went out. He could hear the soft voice of Martha singing the children to sleep. It was an old song he had not heard since his own mother sang it in a sod house in Missouri in 1851. He closed his eyes for one moment. Then he opened them. The boy on the roof of the feed store shifted his weight. The wool blanket scraped against the shingles. Wyatt heard it. He did not turn his head. He raised the rifle from his knees, and he pointed it at the roofline without looking at it, and he said, "Come down from there, son." He said it loud enough to carry across the street. The boy on the roof froze. The boy on the roof had been told he would not be seen. The boy on the roof started to slide backward. Wyatt fired one shot into the shingle 2 feet from the boy's hand. The shingle split. The boy yelled. The rifle fell from the roof and landed in the alley with a hard clank. The boy slid down the back of the feed store and ran. The piano in the saloon stopped. The dog stopped barking. The street went very still. Wyatt Hollis lowered his rifle to his knees. He did not stand up. The lamp in the front room of his small house came on again. Martha Coleman opened the door. She looked at him across the dust. She did not ask what the shot was. She only nodded once. He nodded back. She closed the door. The lamp went out. The street stayed quiet for a long minute. Then the piano in the saloon started up again. Slower this time. Wyatt Hollis listened to it, and he laid the rifle back across his knees. He felt the cool air move down off the ridge. He felt the dust settle on his boots. He poured a small cup of coffee from the pot on the porch rail. He took one sip. He set it down. The street stayed quiet. The lamps stayed lit in the windows along the row. For 10 minutes, nothing moved. For 10 minutes, a man could have believed Cedar Bluff was a peaceful town with a good sheriff and a good Tuesday evening ahead of it. Then a single bell rang once at the back of the bank. It was not the front bell. It was the small iron bell that hung in the strong room. Wyatt Hollis sat up straight. That bell only rang when the strong room door was opened from the inside. There was only one man with the key to open it from the inside. That man was Royce Calder. The bell rang once more. Then a third time. Wyatt Hollis stood up off the porch step. He picked up his rifle. He walked down the steps. He crossed the dust. He did not run. He walked at the pace of a man, going to do a job he had been waiting on for a long time. He stopped in the middle of the street. He turned to face the bank. The green doors of the saloon opened. 3 men stepped out onto the boardwalk. The first was the owner of the bank. The second was the owner of the saloon. The third was Royce Calder. Calder had a piece of paper in his left hand. Calder had a pistol in his right hand. Calder smiled. Calder said the council had voted. He said the Coleman claim had been transferred at 8:47 this evening to the holding company of the Cedar Bluff Cattlemen's Association. He said the transfer was legal. He said it was signed by the territorial registrar in Cheyenne. He said the widow could either sign the matching deed in the morning, or she could be removed from the territory under a writ. He said either way, the 4,000 acres were no longer hers. He said he would personally deliver the writ at dawn. Wyatt Hollis listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When Calder was finished, Wyatt Hollis spoke in his plain voice. He said the woman was sleeping. He said she would sleep through the night. He said no one would wake her. He said the paper Calder was holding was not worth the ink on it because the territorial registrar in Cheyenne had been replaced 6 weeks ago by a federal appointee who had never heard of any of the men on that boardwalk. He said the writ would not be honored. He said any man who came up the steps of his small house before sunrise would be carried back down those steps in a wagon. He said it as plain as a man asks for water. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells YouTube to show this kind of story to more folks like us. And stay with me, because this is where it turns. Royce Calder stopped smiling. The bank owner looked at the saloon owner. The saloon owner looked at Calder. The boy from the feed store roof came running up the alley behind them with his hat in his hand. The boy was pointing back the way he had come. The boy was shouting that there were riders on the South Road. The boy was shouting that he could count 4 of them in the moonlight. The boy was shouting that he could not see the 5th, but he could hear the 5th horse. Wyatt Hollis already knew there were 5. He had been hearing them since the bell rang the second time. He had heard them ford the creek at the bottom of the bridge. He had counted the hooves on the wooden planks. 4 shod and 1 barefoot. He knew the barefoot one. He had known the barefoot one for 19 years. The barefoot one was a paint horse named Indigo who belonged to a man named Jesse Marsh. Jesse Marsh was the federal deputy out of Cheyenne. Jesse Marsh had been Wyatt Hollis's partner in Texas in 1875. Jesse Marsh had been riding north for 2 weeks to deliver a sealed envelope to Wyatt Hollis. The sealed envelope contained a federal warrant for the arrest of Royce Calder on 3 counts of land fraud and 2 counts of murder going back to 1879. Wyatt Hollis had been waiting on that envelope for 10 years. The riders crossed the bridge at the south end of town. The piano in the saloon stopped. The lamps in the windows along the street flickered. Royce Calder's right hand twitched on the grip of his pistol. The bank owner started to back up. The saloon owner started to back up. Calder did not back up. Calder looked across the dust at Wyatt Hollis, and he understood for the first time in his life that he had walked into the wrong man's town 10 years too late. He raised the pistol. He was fast. He had killed 2 men in 1879 because he was fast. He was faster than the saloon owner, and faster than the bank owner, and faster than every man who had ever stepped out of that saloon onto that boardwalk to face him. He was not faster than Wyatt Hollis. The Colt on Wyatt's right hip cleared the leather while Calder's pistol was still rising. The first shot took Calder under the gold watch chain. The second shot took the bank owner in the shoulder as he turned to run. The third shot took the saloon owner in the leg, and he went down on one knee on the green doormat. Wyatt Hollis did not fire a fourth. He walked across the dust at the same steady pace. He stepped up onto the boardwalk. He kicked Calder's pistol off the planks and into the street. He pulled the paper out of Calder's left hand. He looked at it for one moment. He folded it once. He put it in the inside pocket of his coat. He turned to the bank owner, who was holding his shoulder and gasping. He told the bank owner to sit down. He turned to the saloon owner, who was clutching his leg on the green doormat. He told the saloon owner to lie back. He told both of them that the federal deputy was coming up the street, and they would each have a chance to make a long statement before sunrise about every paper they had signed in the back room of that saloon for the last 10 years. He told them that the statements would either go to the judge with their cooperation, or they would go to the judge without it, but they would go to the judge either way. The bank owner started to weep. The saloon owner closed his eyes. The 5 riders came up the street at a slow trot. The lead rider was a tall man with a gray hat and a federal star on his vest. The lead rider was Jesse Marsh. He pulled up in front of the saloon and he looked down at Wyatt Hollis, and he tipped his hat back on his head, and he said, "Well, Wyatt." He said, "It has been a long time." He said, "You have not lost a step." Wyatt Hollis looked up at him. He said, "It has been a long time." He said he had been waiting. He handed Jesse Marsh the folded paper out of his coat pocket. Jesse Marsh read it under the boardwalk lantern. Jesse Marsh laughed once. He said, "This paper is a forgery so clumsy he could have written it with his left hand in the dark." He said the territorial registrar in Cheyenne was a federal man named Owens who had been investigating the Cedar Bluff Council for 11 months. He said there were warrants for the bank owner and the saloon owner and the foreman of the largest ranch as well. He said the foreman had been arrested at his bunkhouse 40 minutes ago by the other 4 riders. He said the foreman was tied to the back of a wagon at the edge of town. He said the council was finished. He said the Coleman claim was free and clear. He said it would be in Martha Coleman's name in writing by sunrise. Wyatt Hollis listened to all of it. He did not smile. He nodded once. He turned and walked back across the dust to the porch of his small office. He sat down on the porch step. He laid the rifle across his knees. He looked at the windows of his small house. The lamp in the front room came on for the 3rd time. The door opened. Martha Coleman stood in the doorway with a quilt around her shoulders. She looked across the street at the 3 men on the boardwalk. She looked at the riders. She looked at the federal star on Jesse Marsh's vest. She looked at Wyatt Hollis sitting on the porch step with his rifle across his knees. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she walked across the dust in her bare feet. She climbed the 3 steps. She sat down beside him. She put one shaking hand on top of his hand. She did not cry. She had stopped crying in 1885. She only said 2 words. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. The cool air moved down off the ridge. The dust settled. The town was very quiet. Somewhere in the back room of the small house, a child turned over in her sleep, and a wooden horse fell softly off the side of the bed and rolled under the chair. The sun came up the next morning behind the long red ridge. The light came down the slope and crossed the roofs of the 6 buildings on each side of the main street. It crossed the boardwalk of the saloon, where 2 men sat handcuffed to the railing. It crossed the wagon at the edge of town, where the ranch foreman was tied. It crossed the alley behind the feed store, where a wool blanket and a rifle were still lying in the dirt. It crossed the dust of the street, and it reached the porch of the small sheriff's office, where 2 people were still sitting on the step. Martha Coleman had fallen asleep against Wyatt Holly's shoulder somewhere around 4 in the morning. He had not moved. He had not wanted to wake her. He had let her sleep. The 2 children came out of the small house at sunrise. Samuel was carrying his sister Ruth on his hip. Ruth was holding her wooden horse. Samuel looked at his grandmother on the porch. He looked at the sheriff. He did not say anything because he had not spoken since the cabin burned. He walked down the wooden walk. He stopped in front of Wyatt Holly's. He held out his small hand. Wyatt Holly shook it. Samuel did not smile, but he held the sheriff's hand for 1 full moment longer than he had to. Then he walked his sister back inside. The federal deputy, Jesse Marsh, was finishing his paperwork in the office. He had a small lap desk on his knees. He had a stack of pages and a fresh ink pot. He was writing out the transfer of the Coleman claim in clean blue ink. He had 2 witnesses ready to sign. He had the federal seal in a leather case at his feet. He had a second envelope ready to send back to Cheyenne. The second envelope contained a letter from him to the federal court, recommending that the Coleman claim be placed in trust for the 2 grandchildren with Martha Coleman as the trustee for her natural life. He had also written a separate letter recommending that Wyatt Holly's be appointed federal marshal for the Cedar Bluff district. He did not tell Wyatt about the second letter. He folded it and sealed it and put it in the leather case. The town came out into the street slowly. The owner of the stockman came out first. He stood on his porch with his hat in his hand. He looked at the cuffed men on the saloon boardwalk. He looked at the wagon at the edge of town. He walked down to the office. He took off his hat. He told Martha Coleman that there was a room at the stockman for her and the children, and it would not cost her a cent. He said it would not cost her a cent for as long as she wanted it. Martha thanked him. She did not take the room. She said she would stay in the small house behind the office for 2 more nights if Sheriff Holly's would allow it. He nodded. She nodded. The stockman owner went back to his porch. The owner of the boarding house came down next. He brought a basket. The basket had eggs and bread and a small jar of honey. He set the basket on the porch step. He did not say anything. He just took off his hat and held it in his hands for a moment, and then he walked back the way he had come. The pastor of the small church came next. He brought a kettle of beef stew that his wife had been keeping warm on the stove since 5 in the morning. He set the kettle on the porch step beside the basket. He said the children should eat something hot. He said he was sorry he had turned them away the day before. He said he had taken a $5 piece for the collection plate, and he had been ashamed of it all night. He said he would put the $5 back in the plate that Sunday, and he would put another 5 with it. Martha thanked him. She thanked all of them in her plain, quiet voice. She did not make any of them feel small for what they had done the day before. She had been a widow too long for that. She knew how a town worked. She knew how fear worked. She knew that the same men who had turned her away yesterday would defend her tomorrow now that the council was gone. Wyatt Holly stood up off the porch step at noon. He stretched his bad leg. He picked up the kettle of stew and the basket of eggs and the bread and the honey, and he carried them inside the small house. He set them on the table next to the Bible. The 2 children were sitting on the floor by the fire. Ruth was feeding her wooden horse a piece of bread crust. Samuel was watching the fire. Wyatt Holly set a small bowl of stew in front of each of them. He poured a cup of milk for Ruth from the small jug The boarding house owner had also left on the porch. He sat down in the chair by the fire. He did not say anything. He just sat with them. After a long minute, Samuel looked up at him, and Samuel said one word. Samuel said, "Sir." It was the first word the boy had spoken in 11 months. Wyatt Hollis did not show any reaction. He just nodded once. He poured a cup of milk for the boy, too. The boy drank it slowly. The fire crackled. Somewhere out in the street, a wagon rolled past. The cool spring air moved down off the long red ridge and through the open window and across the stone hearth. Out on the porch, a thin gray-haired widow stood with a quilt around her shoulders and watched the light move across the roofs of Cedar Bluff. She was 61 years old. She weighed 94 pounds. She had slept 4 hours on a porch step against the shoulder of a man she had met the day before. She had a leather pouch around her neck. Inside the pouch was a folded paper. The paper would be replaced by a clean federal deed before sundown. But she would keep the old folded paper for the rest of her life. She would keep it because of the man who had not asked to see it. She would keep it because of the 2 words she had said to him on the porch step at 4 in the morning. She would keep it because some debts are not paid in money, and some kindnesses are not measured in acres. She would keep it because the cowboy sheriff of Cedar Bluff had looked at her wagon on a dusty street at the end of a long day, and he had not asked her where she came from, and he had not asked her where she was going, and he had only handed her the keys to his own house, and said the bed was made, and there was cornmeal in the cupboard, and a side of bacon in the smokehouse out back. And by dawn, 3 of the most powerful men in the territory were dead or in irons in the street. And the 4,000 acres on the north side of the ridge were hers and her grandchildren's for the rest of their lives. And the small wooden horse that her granddaughter held had not been dropped or broken or lost on the long road from the burned cabin to Cedar Bluff. She watched the light move across the roofs for a long time. Then she went back inside the small house. She closed the door softly behind her. The dust on the main street settled. The cool air moved down off the ridge. The town was very quiet. And the sheriff of Cedar Bluff sat in a chair by the fire with 2 children and a bowl of stew, and he did not say a word for the rest of the afternoon.